Welcome back to Nutripreneur, the hub for unveiling groundbreaking insights into the nutraceutical industry. I'm your host, Bethany. Today, we're excited to welcome Tyler Dawley, the field hand to CEO of Big Bluff Ranch. Tyler is a regenerative rancher specializing in large-scale pasture poultry. With a lifelong commitment to sustainable agriculture, Tyler has transformed Big Bluff Ranch into one of the largest pasture poultry operations on the West Coast. His innovative approach to farming emphasizes nutrition, sustainability, and ecosystem health. Welcome, Tyler. It's so great to have you today.
Thanks. I sound like a really smart, successful person when you put it like that. I'm like, man, I want to talk to that guy.
Well, first off, what inspired you to focus on regenerative agriculture and pasture poultry?
Well, simply enough, I was born here. So that's pretty much it. So Grandpa bought the ranch in 1960. My parents moved up in 76 for a summer project and they never left. So then I was born here, and then my sisters were born here and raised here. Our ranch is not a traditional cowboy ranch. Like, we're not multi-generation, sitting on a horse, roping and riding, and that stuff's all cool, don't get me wrong, but that's not our background. My dad grew up sailing, my mom grew up in Berkeley, and Grandpa bought the ranch at the time at the time he was kind of a richish type dude, and he bought it as a kind of a weekend toy, a little vanity project. And so those kind of foundational formation aspects to the ranch kind of have led us to where we're at now. So the fact that Grandpa bought it as I don't want to say vanity project because it's not right. He was worked really hard at it, but it was not purchased to be a productive commercial operation. And when my parents moved up and started taking over, so it wasn't designed to be a commercial operation. So the ranch is 4,000 acres, but it's not big enough, which I realize is kind of a mind-blowing statement. 4,000 acres and it's not big enough, but it's true. In our neck of the woods, if we wanted to be a commercial cow-calf operation, we'd probably need to be 8 to 10,000 acres. So we're, as I like to say, we're a half-size ranch, half-income ranch, but a full-time job ranch. So, it's just hard and make less money. And then the other thing that happened is when my dad kind of taking over my dad started taking more of the daily management because my dad was not tied to kind of the traditional ranching way of life, that he didn't know how to make the ranch make money. So traditionally around here, we're in Northern California, Sacramento Valley. And the way cowboys run around here is they truck their cows down here to the valley in the winter for green grass. And because they're up in the mountains and the snow's in the mountain, they come down to the green grass where there's no snow. And then when the snow melts, they truck them back up to the mountains for sub-irrigated green grass. So their cows are on green grass year round. And we just didn't want to do that lifestyle. Those guys live in their trucks, hundreds of thousands of miles on their trucks, and they're only a couple years old.
So, Tyler, I think it's great that you have, a personal family connection to the ranch and that you are able to kind of modify the business to fit the needs of the land itself and then also kind of your family and your lifestyle. And so, how has your commitment to sustainable farming practices shaped the nutritional quality of your products?
So that's kind of an interesting question. That there is a whole bunch of evidence that, for instance, our beef is one step back. So through all of our processes of figuring out what to grow and how to market it and sell it and what's best for the land and the customers and all that sort of stuff, we've ended up with becoming certified organic, and we are also just got certified regenerative. And so we have kind of taken part of our path has been getting third-party audits to prove that we are walking the walk and talking the talk. And so we have those third-party audits kind of talking about the quality of our products. Then there's also a whole bunch of scientific literature out there talking about, for instance, grass-fed beef, the correct ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s in your CLAs. And I don't know, every year or two, it seems like they're coming out with either another micro or macro or nano nutrient. And to be honest, I can't keep up with it. I'm not a science dude. I'm not going into PubMed and digging it out. It's just not me. And that to actually quantify our own specific meat, you'd have to send it off to a lab and, a whole bunch of big results. And again, we've actually done it, and I get back gobbledygook. I'm sure it means something to intelligent people who read those numbers often, but I'm like, okay, cool. That's a number. So, that's not a super resounding, like, yeah, that's a great answer. So, but what I would say is that I don't actually feel the need to really quantify the health nutrient density of our product, because I know that kind of the inescapable logic of Mother Nature. If you have healthy soils, which you can see from native perennials, you can see from water infiltration rates, you can see wildlife, you can tell if you have a healthy landscape. And if you have healthy animals, you can tell through fertility rates, through growth rates. And even more nebulous, like, you can just tell if your animals are happy. Yeah. Like, you spend enough time with them, you're just like, oh, they're like, literally like 5 minutes before I got on this call, one of our management practices is to move our cows at least daily, if not multiple times a day, across our rangeland, which is relatively unusual, but we do it because it's cool and it's smart. And the cows broke out of their temporary electric fence. And so I'm like, oh, hey, I don't need to be a genius, but they're unhappy. There's a reason why they went through an electric fence that they, shocked the crap out of them. So there was a reason that they did that. They are not mindless automatons. They are feeling, thinking, smart animals that understand their nutritional needs and their, all this sort of stuff. So my job as a animal steward at this point is be like, oh, okay, the cows broke out. What did I do wrong? This was not that the cows were doing wrong. I set up a situation, and that the cows have given me feedback to what I've set up for them. And so anyways, as far as quantifying the quality of our meat, that healthy land, healthy animals, we can tell healthy animals because you just know them after a time. Like, there's kind of an inescapable logic. If you have healthy soils and healthy animals, how can you not have healthy meat? Right. And if you yourself as a human are eating nutrient-dense products, either your veggies or your meats, that we know, assuming that the people who are listening to this understand that the better food you eat, the better supplements you put into your body, the better, healthier you're going to be, right? So there's this kind of this knock-on effect where my health, your health, will trace all the way back to the health of the soil. And the funny thing about that is the health of the soil actually is the microbiome of the soil itself. So there's nematodes and mycorrhizal fungi and a whole bunch of other stuff in there. And slight rabbit trail, that it's basically a microbiome. Just like you have a gut biome, the cows have a very active gut biome, and the soil actually has a gut biome. And that if you think, I don't know if you've ever seen, but if a cow eats, she actually slobbers and she drops saliva behind. That saliva will actually stimulate the plant to regrow in a different manner than if you mow it with like a lawnmower. So that's why, if you've ever kind of done this, so you look at a lawn that's regrowing versus a pasture that's regrowing kind of side by side, you're like, pasture grows back quicker. And then the cow's picking up the microbiome from the soil and the plants, and she's getting it into her gut, and then she's recycling it through her dung and urine. And then as the human who's actually out here, like, I'm breathing in all this stuff. I'm not picking it up on purpose in my hands, but it's getting on my hands, So it turns out that the microbiome of the soil of the animal and my gut sitting right here have this crazy overlap. Mm-hmm. And so that's a cool thought, right? You're like, not only because we have this, our culture, our society has kind of developed this sense of where we are other. There is nature and then there is us, and that we kind of through our industrial evolutionists kind of feel like we are separate from nature. But the reality is that is like 100% wrong. There's no separation. We are just an animal, just like a cow, just like a cat, just like a dog, just like a plant, just like a nematode in the soil. We're all interconnected. And that the more you dive into this regenerative agriculture, the more you kind of realize that is absolutely the case, So the microbiome that we all share, is like one example of it. I'm sorry, I have like all these like cool like stories. Like, I'm like, oh, well, I got to tell you this story, and like,
Yes.
there's this story. Like, I don't know, I don't even remember the question at this point. But
Oh, that's great. I think observing that and notating how everything really is connected, even if we don't always see it that way. And, I think a lot of people base everything off of lab results. But like you said, I think through observing the soil, the animals, quality of life, all of those things in the end is going to produce nutrient dense products. And so I think that that was a really interesting way to describe it and a really effective and valid way to describe it. And can you also discuss with us the transition from on farm processing to working with a USDA processor and its impact on your product quality and your consumer trust?
so we've been doing direct marketing for what year is it? 2024. So we've been direct marketing for 25 years at this point. I'm not old enough to be that old. Excuse me. So when you start getting into this regenerative agriculture world, the first thing that most of the gurus will talk about, and gurus in a good sense, not like the fake gurus, is that they'll say, hey, get into chickens, that they're small, they're quick to grow, easy to manage, you don't need a lot of infrastructure, and that you can process them on farm. And that there is a relatively large amount of fear mongering around USDA inspection, and that a lot of people start off with this fear mongering, distrust of the government and the USDA inspection process. And that is actually one of their selling points is like, hey, this is not USDA inspected. We process this ourselves. And we started off on that route, not so much from the distrust of the USDA necessarily, but certainly from kind of the practicalities of interfacing with USDA plants, in that even the smallest plant is processing thousands of birds a day. And when we first started off, we were doing like 1,000 birds a year, right? Just the scale of the operation makes it hard to get into USDA when you're just starting out. But we grew and we've processed on farm. We probably did over 3 or 4 years. We probably did 6,000 birds total processed on farm. I am weirdly good at gutting a chicken. And random fact, it's kind of like riding a bike, that through a weird set of circumstances, I ended up on someone else's farm and they didn't know how to gut a chicken, processing these chickens. And I was there and I wasn't supposed to help, but you guys need help. And I'm like, this is how you do it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gutting chickens again. Who knew that it was a skill like riding a bike? I haven't done it for 10 years, 15 years. It took about 3, and I was like, oh God, this is exactly how you do it. This sucks. So anyways, we grew. And so the thing with USDA inspection is that there are tons of problems with USDA inspection. I am not trying to say, hey, that is a perfect system at all. Clearly there are big issues there, but having processed our own chickens, having seen how other people process chickens, that I, as a personal person, feel way better buying a USDA inspected chicken than someone butchered in the backyard. Because even though USDA has all the flaws, like they're at least talking about microbial counts, they're talking about this, they're talking about that, they're building in traceability. There's a lot of benefits to being USDA processed. So we are now USDA processed, and the transition happened in that we grew to the point. So on-farm exemption happens under a USDA exemption like PL 4092, something like that. And what that does is the USDA says, hey, individual states, any operation under 20,000 birds a year, you guys regulate. We don't care what you do. Under 20,000 birds a year, state by state basis, you figure out your own rules and regulations. Some states are 20,000 a year. Some states are 10. Some states you have to have a inspected facility. Some states not. It's individual. But the reality of chickens is that it's a volume game that you just make pennies per chicken. And so you realize that if you start playing with the spreadsheets, that 20,000 birds a year, generally speaking, is not enough volume to make you a full-time living. And you're going to be working your butt off to get 20,000 birds a year done. And so we kind of hit that breaking point where we were processing about 2,000 birds farm. We didn't hire employees. And when I started processing birds, I'd call friends and family like, hey, we got chickens in a couple of weeks. You good to go? They stopped returning my calls. I don't know what happened. It was like, it's cool. It's gutting chicken. Don't you like it? And so we couldn't hire anyone for the amount of chickens we were processing. We burnt out all of our friends and family, and we're literally at a crossroads. Like, what do we do with this chicken operation? Do we grow it? Do we shut it down? We didn't know. I met a guy at a conference, and the classic story of he could sell more than he could raise, and I could raise more than I could sell. And so as soon as you go into that sort of wholesale distribution aspect, you have to be USDA. And he had a USDA processing facility contact, and we went from like 1,800 head a year to 600 head a week. That was our big jump like 11, 12 years ago at this point. And so we've been USDA inspected at the same USDA plant now for 9 years. So I am in favor of USDA inspection. It's not perfect, but I think it's a hell of a lot better than not being inspected.
Yes.
I don't know. Was that even like 80% of the question you were asking? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think the good definitely outweighs the bad with USDA and, being in the USDA processing facilities versus not being in them. So I think, yes, you explained that really well for us. And we talked about regenerative practices. So how do these regenerative practices enhance the nutritional profile of your pasture-raised chickens?
Okay, so regenerative agriculture I've been around long enough. I'm starting to feel old. I'm not, but I've been around long enough. When we first started doing this direct marketing stuff, local was a buzzword, and then it kind of morphed into sustainable, and then it kind of morphed into grass-fed, and now the buzzword these days is regenerative. And to some degree, we want to be careful of the fact that regenerative is a current buzzword where everyone's just talking about it. But I would also say that regenerative, local, sustainable, organic, those are all buzzwords that are circling around the theme of agriculture should make our environment better. It should not degrade our environment. So regenerative actually specifically calls it out. It wants to regenerate our environment. So as far as a buzzword, it's kind of the it word now. But as far as a kind of production philosophy, it's been around ever since, kind of the organic revolution of the 70s and 80s. The specifics of regenerative agriculture have not changed so much, but they've been trying to get my train of thought going here. So regenerative agriculture is trying to take why am I tongue-tied? So current agriculture right now, conventional agriculture, we'll start this way, is to some degree an extractive process where you are kind of taking fertility out of the soil, putting it into a product, some sort of a meat, a veggie, a cash crop, and you're selling it, and you're making a money, and you're kind of drawing out the fertility in the soil. And that these are very effective ways getting getting product out of the ground, but they are quite literally extractive, and that you can kind of look at the amount of the literal tons of topsoil that is being lost, megatons, I think, of topsoil that's being lost every year out of the Midwest, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico where all the pesticides and fertilizers flow down the rivers and just kill everything. You can look at the density, the nutrient density. There's some studies out there. I mean, I think they're a little bit on the fringe, but I don't know, that show that the density of veggies have dramatically decreased over the past 50 years. And so that's kind of conventional agriculture right now. And I actually went to a soil health academy recently, and this guy said this really cool thing. He's like, all the problems that we're facing now, what did we do to get here? Okay, well, this, that, and the other thing. He's like, oh, well then If those things made bad results, shouldn't the exact opposite things make good results? Because that's the opposite of bad is good. It's like, oh, wow, that's really cool. So regenerative agriculture is thinking about the soil first to get to plants, to get to animals, to get to you. Whereas conventional agriculture is kind of you to plants, to animals, to like the bank account, and maybe the soil. The soil is just the thing. So practices, regenerative agriculture is the thought process of, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, like the soil microbes, the soil biome, growing better plants to make healthier animals, to make healthier you. That is the general story of regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is also trying to model production practices much more closely to Mother Nature than what's currently used. So Mother Nature has some things like she never does a monocrop, right? You don't go out and see just a field of corn in Mother Nature, right? It's going to have a diverse mix. She's never going to farm without animals, right? So and that's super high level. So that's regenerative practices where you're bringing in, all this sort of stuff. Manage, like what we're doing with our cows. Like I said, the cows broke out because we were moving them daily. Well, that was trying to mimic how mimicking how herds of elk that were here before white man showed up were herded by the wolves that were around here in California, right? The elk were herded together by the wolves. They ate down an area. They're like, well, there's nothing left here. We're all going to move together to protect each other from the wolves to the next spot that we're going to eat down. And we're not going to come back to this spot for a long time because there's a whole bunch of dung and urine the plants need to regrow. So long story. I'm getting to the answer, I think. So those are some of the like high level regenerative thoughts, manage your animals in the image of Mother Nature, farm your ground in the image of Mother Nature. So if you're in a farming context, you're thinking a lot more about no-till agriculture. You're thinking a lot more about cover crops. You're thinking a lot more about rotating your crops, not always doing corn and soy, but putting in wheat, putting in this, whatever. I'm not a farmer necessarily, not like those guys, so I don't know the specifics, but there is a ton of very fascinating things that they're doing where you can still farm a conventional cash crop and make a ton of money, but actually improve your soil health, not degrade it. And so trying to get to the chickens. So what we do for our chickens is that we raise chickens on pasture. So the majority of chickens are grown in barns. That's what that's what they call them. Their barns are like 50 feet long, 400 feet, or 50 feet wide, 400 feet long, and they're going to pack 20 or 30,000 birds in there. There might have a window, probably not. They're going to have the climate's going to be controlled. Their light cycles are going to be controlled. Their temperatures are going to be controlled. They're going to be fed. They're basically, it is a factory to create chicken meat. And it's very effective. It's very efficient. There's a reason why chicken costs whatever. I don't buy chicken anymore because we grow our own. I don't actually know how much it costs. But let's just, for the purposes of this, say it costs $1.99 a pound to buy a whole chicken at the grocery store. That's absurdly cheap. All sorts of externalized costs that are not going into that price. But what we do is we raise. So you have these birds in a barn. Like, you can just kind of intuitively tell that, like, that's not really how a chicken wants to be raised, right? Like, you stick them in a big old barn, and you're like, I think a chicken wants to be outside and scratch and see the sun and chase some bugs and, do some chickeny type stuff. I think that seems like an intuitive sense, like, makes sense, right? So that's what we do. So we raise our chickens on pasture. So they have access to grass, they have access to bugs, they have the sun, they have the moon, they have the wind, they have the heat, they have the cold, and they experience kind of the full range of nature. And the chickens are not rocket scientists, believe it or not. They really are pretty much as dumb as people say they are. But what they do have is they have a pretty darn good set of instincts. Like, something flies over my head, oh my God, it's a hawk, I should hide under something. And so what my job as a chicken producer on pasture is to create an environment where those instincts work. So, okay, if a hawk flies over, they want to hide under something. Well, then it's my job to give them a shelter to hide under. they only prefer to graze early in the morning and late in the evening, and they hang out for the rest of the day. Well, then I need to give them a hangout location. I need to give them supplemental feed. I need to take care of their water, all this sort of stuff. And so by creating an environment that their instincts work properly in, they're happy chickens. And that part of the things that we find is that our chickens grow 1 to 2 weeks slower than a conventional bird, which you think that doesn't make a huge difference. But that's like a conventional bird usually is giving harvested at 6 weeks or less of age. And, we're harvesting 7 to 8 weeks. Because there's a truism, age equals flavor, right? So that extra week or two, if I can't do the percentages that quickly in my head, but it's 20% longer. Like that actually changes, right? Changes the flavor profile, changes the nutrient density of the meat. Our birds are getting exercise, they're running around. So when you get around to eating them, like their meat is, it's not mush. And the few times I eat grocery store chicken, it's like mush. Our chicken actually has some bite to it, some texture. And so that's how we're kind of taking care of the animals to make them healthy, access to good pasture with this environment that we've set up for them. And then to take care of the soil is that those chickens are only there one time a year. So they're going to impact, they're going to poop on it, they're going to scratch it, they're going to kind of hammer it down, and then we're just gone for a whole year, at least 12 months, sometimes 16 months. And so what happens is that soil microbiome that I keep talking about, they're like, oh, look at all these nutrients. I got chicken poop. I got this. I've got that. We're going to go like, oh, yummy, chomp, 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 chomp. And they eat all that good stuff. The plants are going to take all those nutrients, put it down into the soil for the microbiome, and like all this good stuff happens. And that we will end up the next year, you will see a very dark strip where the chickens were raised, and then of the grass. And then right next to it, there's going to be a lighter green strip. And that's just showing you how much fertility we're bringing back to the soil by raising chickens on pasture the way we are. That's kind of another long rambling answer of how we take care of the chickens and take care of the soil. Why regenerative agriculture is taking, everything we do, we're thinking about the soil and the soil microbiome. And then how do we manage our animals to improve that? Because it's not, the better we take care of the soil, so it's this synergistic thing where the better we take care of the soil, the more grass it's going to grow. Well, hey, we get to grow more animals to take care of more grass, to take care of more soil. But once you start growing more animals, that's called production. That's something you can sell. That actually makes you more money. That's the thing about regenerative agriculture, is that there is a little bit of a transition period, but ultimately you get to the point where you are making more money in this style, that your production will stay about the same by all accounts, but your inputs go down to nothing, right? You're not inputting anything. Dow Chemicals isn't going to get your money. Monsanto's not going to get your money. Bayer's not going to get your money. You don't need that crap. There's this whole kind of industrial inertia inputs into agriculture that are really only designed to solve symptoms of a bad production practice. You have a good production practice and you don't need as many dewormers. You don't need growth hormones. You don't need fertilizer. You don't need it.
Yes.
But it's a multi-billion-dollar company, and there's regenerative agriculture is not going to be going to Congress with, $10,000 in a pocket to bribe a congressman, right? So, yeah, I guess that's me going off slightly onto my soapbox there, is don't need it. Probably going to stick around because they got a lot of money, but you don't need it.
Right. I know. I mean, I think what you're explaining is just, it makes so much sense. And it seems like it's a simple, natural process, and it's effective. It works. And it is different from what you typically think of, because I know when I'm envisioning chicken, I don't want to say manufacturing, but chickens, I'm thinking of them in the barn you described. I'm not thinking of them out in the pasture, just free range. And so thank you for explaining that. That was great. That was very insightful and helpful, and it makes sense to me. Absolutely.
No problem. I mean, I love this sort of stuff, and that I have a pretty firm belief that I can't really prove scientifically, but agriculture is going to be a huge component going forward in any sort of climate mitigation change. That the amount of carbon that good regenerative agriculture can sequester is insane. Changing how much fossil fuels we burn is probably the number one thing to take care of. But number two or number three is going to be agriculture. And it touches everything. It touches climate change. It touches social justice. It touches healthcare. It touches schools. It touches, hospitals, jails. Like, I don't know, food is like, it's the throughput, right? Through everything. We all eat. And that's every time we eat something, that is a dollar that is going to voting towards the scale of what sort of food system we are literally buying, right? So when you go and buy that piece of junk at the gas station, although it's very delicious, don't get me wrong, I am not pure by any means, but you're voting for that, right? And so this is kind of the groundswell. I mean, so we've been doing this, for 25-ish years. I remember when grass-fed beef was like a fringe thing, and now you can get it at Whole Foods. McDonald's had a grass-fed beef burger. I think it was McDonald's had a grass-fed beef burger you could buy for a while. I mean, that is a huge change. You can still get it at every Trader Joe's. It's almost gotten to a commodity. And so, and organics, I'm going to get this statistic a little bit wrong, but certified organic production has grown by like 20 or 30% a year for decades. But it's still going from like 1%, like a 20% growth of 1% is like to what, 1.2? Like it's better than nothing. I think organic is more than that. But you see what I'm saying, that even though it is growing fast, it is still a small percentage of production in general. But it is growing and is accelerating. And it really excites me that things are starting to change. More people are talking about it. It's starting to show up. Well, I can't. I'll go excited again. But just one little bit of excitement. So as far as thinking about how this might get sort of embedded into our culture, into our society, into our government, there is this program here in California called the Healthy Soils Program. And there's this one, I get the story a little bit wrong, but close enough for the point of the story. There's this one restaurateur who had a really awesome restaurant. It was like a carbon neutral restaurant. And then got really good at it. And it was like, I can't make enough of an impact with just a restaurant. I want to impact more. I can only buy from so many farmers. So I don't know. Then things happened that I don't know so much about, but he got involved in policy and they passed some bill. They got funding and they are now running this Healthy Soils program, and they're granting out millions of dollars a year to producers like us. We're participating in the program to spread rangeland compost, which does all sorts of amazing things, to do cover crops, let's do all sorts of things. So there is actual policy at state level that is enacting this regenerative agriculture change. The USDA through the NRCS, government, people are always up in arms about the Farm Bill, at least in agriculture, and it's definitely got some massive issues. But every now and then, it's so big that you can slide in a little like good idea every now and then, and just kind of like gets snuck in by accident almost. NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation District, which is the kind of the government arm that farmers and ranchers deal with the most, they have grant programs. The most notable one is called the EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And in that program, they have a list of practices, hundreds of them. But in those practices, they have cover crops, they have hedgerows, they have compost application, they have managed grazing. So this is the government paying farmers to create change, to do things better. And that it's not 100% right, but just as far as a indication of future trends, it's like, whoa, we've got that through the USDA. That's pretty cool. Like 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been around 20 years ago. So as far as like being hopeful about where all of this stuff is going to end up, I am a farmer, I'm a rancher, so kind of by nature, I have to be optimistic. Otherwise I would be smart and get a city job. But it feels like things are changing, and it's changing. The pace of change is increasing, which is pretty hopeful and pretty exciting.
Yes. And what advice do you have for new farmers and ranchers that are interested in sustainable agriculture?
Don't do it. No, sorry, that was, there's a quote. It was either JFK or someone earlier. Agriculture is the only industry where you buy at retail, you sell at wholesale, and you pay freight both ways. So it's, or here's a funnier way of saying roughly the same thing. Here's a question. It's a joke. You're going to laugh so much. How do you make a small fortune in agriculture?
I don't know.
You start with the big one. See, I told you were going to laugh. So look, agriculture is my life calling. I think more people should be doing it, but it is not, it is a business first. Like you need to go, it's a business first. Like you need to go into it. You need to you don't have to do a business plan, like not a 40 or 50 page business plan, but don't just get some acreage and start growing some product and hope someone's going to buy it. It's not going to work out very well for you. That this really work. Who do you want to be when you grow up? Which is a question I always ask myself. What does your local food community need? What does your local landscape need? And there's that Venn diagram. Once you kind of start laying all those pieces out, that little overlap is what you should be doing. And maybe it's veggies, maybe it's row crops, maybe it's animal production, maybe it's poultry. It can be a whole bunch of things, but it's not it is romantic. It's pretty awesome, really, but it doesn't just fall into your lap, right? There's a lot of work. So you should be thinking about educating yourself ahead of time. You should be thinking about the business aspect of it, that it'll be incredibly alluring. And I fall into it all the time of like learning about new production practices. Like I'm really kind of digging into compost teas right now. There's no business until you're selling something. So you need to be thinking about how you're going to sell, how much money you need to make as a family, as an individual, how much you have to sell. Like, man, I'm making this sound way too dire. I just want people to go into it, relatively aware that it just doesn't happen. You really have to want it. It's just like, it's an entrepreneurial journey that's get tied into Mother Nature. So that's kind of the trickiest thing about agriculture is that I don't even know 40, 50, 60% of it, you're not in charge of it. I have no way of controlling if it rains or not. So luckily we had a whole bunch of rain this year. We have more grass than we have cows. I'm trying to, turn our grass into value, and everyone else is like, we don't need grass. We got plenty. Everyone around here got rain, right? The grass is not valuable. But then a couple of years ago, we had no rain and there was no grass, right? So our production had to go down. So every year, every season, you are balancing kind of the economic realities of being a business, which is a lot of that is built on regularity, consistency, and volume, and making small margin but high volume. And then on the other hand, you're over here dealing with Mother Nature, where sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't. It gets hot, it gets cold. A skunk gets into your brooder and kills a whole bunch of chickens. It's totally fun because you have so many things you're balancing at all times. Like if you're someone who really likes all this sort of stuff, it's awesome. There's something very soul satisfying about get to use every aspect of you. You get to use your brain to figure all this out. You get to use your hands to build stuff. You get to look out and you get to see the things you built right away. You get to see the change over time, right? So I've been here my whole life, essentially. My kids are 12-ish, 10, 12, and they are playing in the creek that I played in the creek as a kid. But I remember as a kid, there wasn't very much riparian jungle, cottonwoods, willows, trees like that. Now there's a ton of it because of the stuff we've done, right? So that means that between my dad's work and my work, that we, through the sweat of our brow and the might of our hands, we have created change, and we can see that over a long term. Like we did that, right? So that's just really cool. And then you get into the whole heart and soul thing. Like, this is what I want to do. People always ask, like, have you ever had this thought experiment or been asked this question? Like, if you had $1 million tomorrow, what would you do? Right.
Yeah.
Would you be doing this? I don't know. Most
probably not.
Right. Most people say probably not. Most people would be like, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be hunting every day. I'm like, that's such a weird answer. But for me, if I had $1 million, I'd be doing this exact same thing. Right. So this is me. This is all I want to do. So I guess as far as a practical step to, if you want to become a farmer, get excited, learn practices. But before you actually go into business, learn some business stuff first. Right. Sorry, that was a long rambling. You should do it. But we need more people in agriculture. Just go into it with your eyes wide open. It's not easy.
Yes. No, I mean, I think it sounds like, of course, there's a lot of challenges and hard work along the way, but overall, it sounds like it's a rewarding journey for sure. So, well,
If I had just said that, I could have taken that whole 4-minute answer down to like 4 seconds. I gotta be a little more succinct with my answers here.
I like your passion and your stories, so it's great. And thank you, Tyler, once again for just sharing all about your remarkable journey and your insights into regenerative practices and sustainable agriculture. For our listeners that are eager to learn more about Big Bluff Ranch or explore their organic pasture-raised chicken, we've provided the necessary links. Do subscribe, share your thoughts, and join us in spotlighting the nutraceutical world on social media. Until our next episode, stay informed and inspired by the innovations of nutraceuticals.